On 24th February 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine when his 200,000 Russian soldiers entered Ukraine from several directions, accompanied by airstrikes. In a broadcast beamed worldwide on 21st February 2022, Putin gave the following reasons for the invasion. 1. That the invasion was a special military operation. 2. To demilitarize and denazify Ukraine and not occupy it by force. To protect people who for 8 years have been facing Ukrainian bullying, humiliation, and genocide. 4. Ensuring Ukraine neutral status. 5. Preventing NATO from gaining a foothold in Ukraine. 6. An act of self-defense against NATO expansion. And 7. That Ukraine and Russia are not just neighbors, but one nation. But this invasion did not go without condemnation from world leaders, including US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and others. It will be recalled that in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and also backed the Ukrainian separatists who declared independence from Ukraine. Today, Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic are part of Russia. For you to understand the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, follow me, let us go down memory lane, and that will take us to the 8th and 9th century. Kyiv, the present capital of Ukraine, used to be the capital of the Slavic state of Kievan Rus. The territory extended from Baltic to the Black Sea, and it is today the area occupied by Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. The territory was under Russian rule even after the collapse of the state of Kievan Rus. The Russian Empire later occupied the territory until the Russian Revolution, a period of political and social upheaval that took place in Russia from 1917 to 1923. When the USSR, also known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was formed on December 30th, 1922, it consisted of 4 republics: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Transcaucasian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, which later split into Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Over time, the USSR grew to include a total of 15 republics until the USSR was dissolved on December 26, 1991. Ukraine became independent on September 16, 1991. Russia and Ukraine were the 2 most important nations that emerged, as they had all the war arsenal of the defunct Soviet Republic. For instance, Ukraine became the 3rd largest nuclear power in the world, as it held about 1/3 of the former Soviet nuclear weapons, delivery system, and significant means of its design, knowledge, and production. Ukraine inherited about 130 ICBMs with 6 warheads each, 46 Molodets ICBMs with 10 warheads apiece, as well as 33 heavy bombers, totaling approximately 1,700 nuclear warheads, in addition to the following: tanks, It's estimated that Ukraine inherited around 4,000 Soviet-era tanks, including the T-72 and T-80, while Russia inherited around 22,000 tanks of various types. Aircraft. Ukraine inherited around 700 Soviet-built aircraft, while Russia inherited over 2,000. Missiles. Both Ukraine and Russia inherited a significant number of missile systems. Small arms. It's estimated that Ukraine inherited around 3 million small arms, while Russia inherited around 17 million. Naval vessels. Ukraine inherited a relatively small number of Soviet-era naval vessels, while Russia inherited a much larger portion of the Soviet Union's naval fleet. However, in 1994, Ukraine opted to move all the nuclear weapons to Russia under the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Budapest Memorandum signed by USA, UK, and Russia. In return, Russia guaranteed to respect the security and sovereignty of Ukraine. The NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Budapest Memorandum are international agreements related to nuclear weapons and security guarantees. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, is a treaty signed in 1968 by most of the world's countries, including Ukraine and Russia. The NPT aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, promote cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and pursue nuclear disarmament. Under the NPT, non-nuclear weapons states agree not to acquire or develop nuclear weapons, while nuclear weapons states agree to pursue disarmament. On the other hand, the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances is a diplomatic agreement signed in 1994 by Ukraine, Russia, the US, and the United Kingdom. The memorandum provided security assurances to Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine's accession to the NPT and its agreement to give up its inherited nuclear weapons. The memorandum's signatories pledged to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, refrain from the use or threat of force against Ukraine, and consult with each other if Ukraine's security was threatened. However, in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, violating Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The Budapest Memorandum signatories did not intervene, and the incident highlighted the limitations of the memorandum's security assurances. In 2004, the presidential election that took place between Viktor Yanukovych and Viktor Yushchenko was marred with irregularities in the form of electoral fraud and voter intimidation, and a rerun was carried out after the Orange Revolution and Yushchenko won. Let me explain the Orange Revolution. The Orange Revolution was a series of protests and political events that took place in Ukraine from late November 2004 to January 2005. The protests were triggered by allegations of fraud and vote rigging in the presidential election held on November 21, 2004, which was won by Viktor Yanukovych. Yanukovych was backed by the then outgoing president Leonid Kuchma and supported by Russia. The opposition candidate Viktor Yushchenko, who was backed by pro-Western and pro-democracy forces, disputed the election results and claimed that he had won. His supporters took to the streets of Kyiv. The capital of Ukraine and other cities, demanding a new election and the recognition of Yushchenko as the rightful winner. The protests continued for weeks, with hundreds of thousands of people participating in peaceful demonstrations and strikes. The protests were marked by the use of orange as a symbol of the opposition movement and the adoption of the slogan Yushchenko or death. The political crisis was eventually resolved by a new election on December 26, 2004, which was deemed free and fair and won by Viktor Yushchenko. The Orange Revolution was widely regarded as a victory for democracy and popular protests, and it had significant implications on Ukraine's future relations with Russia and the West. The Orange Revolution also paved the way for Ukraine's eventual integration with the European Union and the development of a more democratic and open society. In 2010, there was another election, and Yanukovych, who lost in the last rerun, was this time the winner. His removal as president was the result of a chain of events that got underway in November 2013. Yanukovych abruptly changed his mind and rejected a planned association agreement with the EU, opting instead to forge deeper connection with Russia and accept a Russian credit bailout under pressure from Russia. This provoked a wave of widespread protests by proponents of European integration known as the Euromaidan, who occupied Kyiv's International Independence Square and organized rallies around Ukraine. This led to violent protests and Berkut Special Riot Police encounters. From February 18 to 2014, there was a lot of bloodshed in Kyiv when police snipers shot and killed about 100 protesters. Yanukovych fled Ukraine on 22nd February 2014 and went to Russia, where he now resides. That brings us to the status of Crimea. Why did Russia invade and annex Crimea? In 1783, Catherine the Great of Russia annexed Crimea to the Russian Empire from the Ottoman Empire. Even though Russia lost Crimea in 1856 and recaptured it in 1876, it still remained a part of the Russian Empire. In 1954, Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea from Russia to Ukraine, while both were under USSR, and nobody bothered about it, and it remained so after the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. But when both countries became autonomous, Russia had military bases on the Crimean Peninsula. Besides, most of the residents of Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk, regarded as the Donbass, were also primarily Russian-speaking. The question then is, how come the eastern part of Ukraine is more Russian-speaking? A close observation of Ukraine will reveal that the western part speaks Ukraine dialect. They are pro-Western and will prefer to have ties with the EU for trade, cooperation, etc., and join the NATO. On the other hand, the eastern part, especially the Donbas region, speak Russian. They are pro-Russian and will prefer to associate with Russia. The development was a result of the period of 1932 to 1933 in the then USSR, where John Stalin carried out a project called Holodomor. The Holodomor was a man-made famine which was caused by Stalin's policies of collectivization and forced grain requisitions, which led to the death of several millions of Ukrainians. It was reported that Stalin replaced the Ukrainians with Russians in that part of Soviet Union. He repopulated the devastated countryside with Russians. Hence, the eastern part is so populated by Russians. In 2014, Crimea voted to join Russia. To Russia, it was the right thing to do, but to the rest of the world, it was an annexation of Crimea by Putin. Putin backed the Ukrainian separatists, who then took over Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic and declared independence. They later opted to join Russia. The series of fighting that took place was supposed to be resolved through the Minsk Agreement in 2014, which called for a ceasefire, military withdrawal, election in rebel-held areas, and a demilitarized zone of 15 kilometers. But to date, the agreement remained unimplemented. Let me expatiate on the Minsk Agreement. The Minsk Agreement is a package of ceasefire agreements signed in 2014 and 2015 to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatists. The agreements were signed in Minsk, Belarus, by representatives of Ukraine, Russia, the Donetsk People's Republic, and the Lugansk People's Republic. The main terms of the Minsk Agreement include ceasefire. A ceasefire was agreed starting on February 15, 2015. 2. Withdrawal of heavy weapons. Both sides agreed to withdraw heavy weapons and allow monitoring of the withdrawal by the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. 3. Constitutional reform. Ukraine agreed to carry out constitutional reform to decentralize power and give more autonomy to the eastern region. Amnesty. Amnesty was granted to those involved in the conflict on both sides. 5. Humanitarian issues. Both sides agreed to allow humanitarian aid to reach the affected areas and to exchange prisoners and hostages. 6. Elections. Local elections were to be held in the separatist-held areas of Donetsk and Lugansk under Ukrainian law and with the OSCE monitoring the process. However, the implementation of the Minsk Agreement has been incomplete and sporadic, and the ceasefire has been violated on numerous occasions. The conflict in eastern Ukraine remains unresolved, sporadic fighting continuing to this day. Today, Putin had declared special military operation into Ukraine. Russia is insisting that NATO should go back to its 1997 border position. Also, that NATO should remove its forces and military infrastructure from Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Baltics, and also to stop its expansion. But the Western leaders and NATO have refused, saying that NATO is a defensive alliance and not a threat to Russia. The world leaders and the EU have disagreed with Russia and instead declared economic sanctions on Russia and decided to grant military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine to withstand the onslaught by Russia. They have asked Russia to withdraw and that Ukraine is a sovereign state that can take decisions on its own. My YouTube friends, I want you to make your comments, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.